Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. It's interesting. I told you about this. If we were to just create a flux capacitor and go back in 10, 15 years in your life, you'd be sitting in that chair, and we'd be able to talk about. There's a lot of different directions this conversation can go. I think where I want to start it though is like the first 90, 60 days on the job as a GM, because you're actually at the 60th day today. Correct, Kyle?
That's correct.
All right. So what are some of the lessons learned in the first 60 days on the job?
Well, it's been interesting because it was early May starting, and so we had our primary development team was still in the playoffs, and that had been a primary focus of mine. So I was wanting to keep the attention and focus on them from my perspective, so that didn't drop off, and lend support where I could. And then, we had our scouting combine coming up at the end of May. We had our draft coming up at the end of June, and then we had free agency coming up July 1st. And then there was also some changeover in our staff as well. So it was trying to fill in for the people who were departing and make sure that we just stayed on the tracks towards the draft and free agency, and we didn't have anything fall between the cracks. And so it ended up being a very busy time. Some days I wish were a little bit longer, but we have a great staff that was able to fill in, and I think the key thing was just maintaining the focus and the concentration for myself and then subsequently our staff, and at the same time trying to make sure that we drafted well, that we were prepared for free agency, but then subsequently that we were also starting to change some of the things that we had wanted to change about the organization, both in our drafting, coaching, style of play, the types of players that we were acquiring, and some of the processes that we were following. So it was quite busy.
So you had to do everything at once, and you're in the middle of the maelstrom now. But you've had a lot of time to reflect on, since moving to the Blue Jays, but do you remember the first, 60, 90 days of being the GM of the Boston Red Sox?
I remember it well enough to know that in spending the day with Kyle yesterday and then this morning, I would not have been able to sit here like Kyle is right now and be as present and listen and be as focused. So credit to him for being able to do that. I remember pretty clear. And so towards the end of 2011, I had been working with Theo Epstein in our baseball ops group with the Red Sox for a long time. We'd been mostly successful during that time. Theo gets an opportunity to go to the Cubs, and so ownership approached me about taking the job. And the way I perceived that at the time was really there were sort of two things going on. One is it was partly an affirmation of what we had done, the Theo certainly, but the baseball ops group, what the baseball ops groups had done, and so they were looking at me as I was an opportunity to sort of, add some stability and continuity to that. Yeah. The other piece of it was that I do think that ownership was looking for someone who would sort of take a fresh look at collaborating with them and really partnering with them and working with them to manage whatever challenges lay ahead. So thinking back on the first 60 or 90 days, lessons I learned was that I think in two ways I sort of I didn't do what I needed to do as a leader to be effective. On the one hand, I think I tried to, with baseball operations, I tried to continue to provide to them what Theo had provided, and sort of, lead in the way that Theo had, and I just couldn't pull that off because Theo's a force of nature and I'm much different, and our strengths are different, and in fact, it was counterproductive because the things maybe that I was good at, weren't coming out as much. So that happened, and then the other aspect, in my desire, and I did have a desire to work closely with ownership and really partner with ownership and figure out sort of how we could work together to manage the challenges. But in doing so, in retrospect, I think I probably focused too much on what I could give and didn't ask for quite a much back. And I don't mean that in terms of resources or money or things like that, but literally just asking for a real commitment to a mission. How are we going to do this together, and being disciplined about that. And it really wasn't until later in 2012 that I think I started to find my legs on both of those fronts. Started to be more specific with conversations with ownership about how we were going to do this, and also started to just be myself more with the baseball ops group, and I think it led to, a more effective period of time after that.
Yeah. And so one of the things you talked about was doing a really good self-assessment of yourself and wishing that you had done that at that point in time. And the previous GM, he told you not to be him, correct? And now, have you gone through and actually asked your staff what you're good at and what you need to continue to emphasize? And have you gone through that self-assessment process?
I think that's always been something that was important. So Lou Lamoriello was the general manager that I took over from, and he's a very different type of manager than I am. And it was interesting when he first started with the Leafs. He had said to me that when he was the athletic director at Providence, the key fault of the athletic director that succeeded him was that he tried to be him. And I think in my case, there's a large disparity in our age and just our style of management. And I grew to really respect Lou in the way that he did a lot of things, and he was exceptional in helping to mentor me and teach me things that I didn't know or that were not strengths of mine. But I knew right from the beginning, because of his personality and mine, as much as we're friends, that I could not ever be him, and that I needed to continue to be myself. And to use what I thought were my strengths and would have worked in the different organizations that I've been with, Steve. And so I always try to get from people a sense of really. I think it's easy to ask people what do I do well, yeah. And people are usually apt to tell you that. But I think it's surrounding yourself with the type of people that will tell you what you don't do well and what you need to improve on and what you're not giving to them as the people that you work with, and that you're not providing to them. As your coworkers. And if you can honestly find that mix and find those people to surround yourself with, I think it makes everybody better. It makes the culture and the environment of the group better, because they know that they can tell you, Kyle, you really don't do this well, or Ben, you don't do this so well, and we kind of need you to be better here for our organization. And so that's always been the types of people that I've tried to surround myself with, and then encourage them to be very honest with me about the things that I don't do very well at all, so that either I can improve them or we can find somebody that does them much better than I.
And you talked a little bit about the ownership group and managing the ownership group. Did you have anyone from the ownership group actually helping mentor you in the first couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I reported to our CEO at the time, was Larry Lucchino, who was great with me, and I learned a lot from. The interesting thing was he was getting towards the end of his career. Mm-hmm. And so was thinking about his transition into the next phase, and the team was actually trying to groom a successor to him, and so I developed a relationship with that, and that person ended up being Sam Kennedy, who's the CEO of the Red Sox now. So I was working closely with both Larry and Sam, but they were both at different points in their sort of career arc. So I certainly learned a lot from both of them. But looking back, I think. The piece that Kyle talked about getting that honest feedback, that might come from a boss or a mentor. Yeah. It also can come from somebody you're working with in baseball ops, in our case, or it can come from someone who's working for you. It can come from anywhere, and that's something I would have doubled down on more if I did it again. Was making sure that I was getting that critical feedback more consistently from all of those groups.
Gotcha. And let's stay on the topic of doubling down, because the other day we had a conversation about 2013. 2013, you guys go to the World Series, very successful year, and you rebuilt that year, and we'll talk about the rebuild here later. But talk a little bit about what you mentioned the other day as far as doubling down on the culture at that point in time versus trying to just win it all again in 2014.
Yeah. So one of the nice things about winning is that it should provide you with some political capital, to invest more in the things that you care about. And in my case, looking back, we had, going into, really, even in 2012, going into that, we saw the sort of evolution of the team in two phases. This was Boston, so there was never going to be a rebuild. But we saw it in two phases. We saw sort of 2012 to 2015 as a short-term period where we needed to try to win in a specific way. We had a veteran core of players, and the job was to complement those players as well as we could, build a strong enough culture so that team could win as it aged. And the longer-term phase was we had young players coming up through the system. There was going to be an opportunity to invest more in young players through in the international market and the draft to continue that pipeline. And we were going to do everything we could to avoid moving young players, moving picks, so that we'd preserve that longer term.
Yeah.
So the first part of it, tough start in 2012, but actually helped us work more effectively. And so we go into a successful year in 2013, and that should have been an opportunity to really reinvest in the things we needed to do to be successful and get to the longer phase. And we didn't take advantage of that opportunity. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, I look back, we talked about taking advantage of it. We did things that winter to try to take advantage of it, but we didn't do enough. So as soon as we won, my recollection of this anyway, as soon as we won, it went from, a group of people being like really focused together, collaborating, holding each other accountable to what we wanted to be, to you started to feel people drift a little bit, and the sort of human nature of, okay, we got complacent. That's the only word I can use. A little bit complacent in those next few months, and failed to take advantage of that opportunity. Mm-hmm. The first sign of that was that we mismanaged a contract extension discussion with John Lester. As part of this build, we had identified 3 veteran players that we were going to extend. We knew we were going to lose some guys in free agency because you can't sign all of them. We didn't want to sign all of them. We identified David Ortiz, Dustin Pedroia, and John Lester as the 3 that we wanted to keep, that we would then try to integrate our young players into that group. So we were successful in extending Ortiz and Pedroia. We tried to do it with Lester prior to the 2014 season, and I think in part because we had become distracted a little bit by the World Series. We weren't disciplined enough to take advantage of a moment there where we had a moment with John. And that meant we didn't get anything done in spring training. It gets into the season, and then there's sort of this ripple effect of starts to impact the culture and the team, and leads to decisions after that ended up being counterproductive for that team and ultimately me. So yeah, I look back at sort of like the opportunity that I wish we had back as a group, and I wish I had back personally, were those few months after the World Series in 2013.
Gotcha. And Kyle, you guys just make the playoffs last year for the first time in how many years?
In 2017. So the last 2 years.
Last 2 years, you guys. Yeah. And so you're right in the cusp. I mean, you just signed the top free agent in the market too. So like, what are you doing aside? You have your personnel moves that are part of your rebuild right now. But what are some of the things that you're thinking about as far as the culture of the team goes as well?
Well, it's been interesting because when I joined the team in 2014, it was evident upon arrival that our mandate was going to be that we were going to have to endure a very substantial rebuild of our organization. And we had the decision at that point. We did move some of our better players that were very good players in the league at that time after the first season or during the second season, 2015-16. But we had a lot of internal debate about what we would do with players that were in their mid-20s that probably would not be, would be in their early 30s by the time our younger core of draft picks and prospects developed and were entering their prime. And I think the conventional wisdom at the time was, on the back of a lot of the things that were happening in basketball, was you just tear it down right to nothing and move all those players out and return picks and prospects and then roll from there. And then, so we had a lot of internal debate on was, well, do you do that? Because then you're counting on all these young players to just carry the mantle the whole way. And I'm not sure that it might work in basketball, but I'm not sure that it works in hockey, where your best players aren't on the playing surface as much as they are in basketball. Yep. So we made the decision that we were going to keep some of our players that were in their mid-20s, heading towards 30, and that they would help to shelter and guide along our younger players coming in. And I think when you look back on it, that was one of the decisions that we went back and forth on a lot, of what to do. Do you tear it all the way down and try to get as many picks and prospects as you can, or do you move some of the players out but keep some of the other guys that can supplement and shelter our young players as they get their first couple years under their belt? And so that's what we did. We elected to move ahead with that model of keeping a few select. They weren't older veteran players, but they had 5-6 years experience in the league, and they were good people. And I think without keeping those players there, we probably don't make the playoffs the last 2 seasons, and that's now given time for our younger players to accrue 2 seasons or more of experience and help guide the team to the playoffs. And and all those players now, just by chance, they've all departed in free agency, but their contributions to the team and getting us to this point have been absolutely massive. And it was the topic that we debated the most of what we were going to do, and then that was the decision that we made, was to supplement our young players with some solid people, and it worked out quite well.
And so with the Blue Jays, how are the Blue Jays, and how are you helping the organization think about returning itself to its glory days?
Yeah, I think first of all, the great part of being with the Blue Jays right now, being part of what we're trying to do, is that thanks to certainly Mark Shapiro and Ross, their leadership, but also Roger's support, our ownership group, there really has not been effectively any limitation in terms of our ability to invest in the resources that we choose to invest in, whether that's coaching, whether that's performance, scouting, whether that's just learning people. There's been a really healthy investment in that, and sure, part of that's because Mark and Ross have done a good job articulating that vision. So that's been really exciting to be a part of, and I think gives us a chance to really build something exceptional in the long term. The challenge, I suppose, has been that the Blue Jays sit in a unique place in that they're the only major league team in Canada, so it sort of takes on a unique place in baseball in Canada, and you're representing something more than Toronto. And we sit, in the same city as the Leafs, so there's that. And the Leafs are always going to be a very powerful team and brand in Toronto. So as the team had success, as the Blue Jays had success in 2015 and 2016, and people started coming into the park, that really got people's attention. And so there was a real desire to try to continue to extend that window of contention and get a firmer, hold on and and create a firmer grasp on the fan base, and really try to drive that for a longer period of time, which meant that some of the opportunities that a team might take advantage of, like selling high on a veteran player and getting younger assets for that player, weren't realistically available to us, and that was fine. That was fine with us, and we felt like if we threaded the needle the right way, both in last year and this year, 2018, that we could contend and continue to build from underneath. And I think we went into both years feeling like, with a little bit of luck, some breaks, decisions go our way, there was a chance to do that. It hasn't worked out that way in either year. I don't think that there was really an alternative strategy in either year for us. Certainly we could have made different individual decisions, but in the long term, what feels the best is that deep commitment and investment in people and those resources I talked about has been there. And so I think if we can buy enough time, there'll be something really good that comes out of that.
And what do you two think about the entire idea of a complete rebuild from the studs? Would you like that as a GM? Is that appealing? Would you like to have that opportunity at some point? To actually just take the whole thing down and just rebuild it from the start, just like the 76ers did?
It's tough to really answer. I think in hockey, we were talking about it before in basketball, and yeah. I'm just a basketball fan. Their season coincides directly with ours, so you don't really have the same ability to dive into it. But it seems now in basketball that inefficiency that was there, that the Sixers captured, is gone. Like, I remember at the end of the year, I'd look at the standings, and it was like the same 7 or 8 teams were stuck at 22, 23, 24 wins for weeks at a time. And so you could have a season that's the worst in the history of your franchise, and you end up only picking 7th or 8th or whatever that may be. So in hockey, it's very different. The way that the sport has sort of transformed its economics, you have 3 years of a player on his entry-level deal where they can make, if they reach maximum bonuses up to, just south of $4 million if you're a very high pick, but usually around, just less than $1 million. And then after that, the way that the economics of the game have transformed, the player is getting a 7 or 8 year contract at a high rate out of that. So you don't really have that same time where you can have players perform at a controlled wage. I think in baseball they use the term he's under team control. In hockey, that doesn't really exist with the way that the game has evolved. So you have really 3 years with those elite young players where they're under that team control, and then they're graduating on to being paid at a very high level. So I don't know that the complete tear down from into the foundation and do a total rebuild from there would be as effective in hockey. And like I said, when I talk about our own team, a lot of the credit has to go to those contributions that we've received from those players that had been with the organization, and that some of them are still there, especially on defense, that are now in their mid-20s, nearing their late 20s, so they're still playing some of their best hockey. You would need a deep commitment from ownership to go through that type of rebuild. You've seen teams that have sort of committed to it in hockey to go through a full rebuild, tear it down, and then after a year, the owner, depending on the market, will kind of backtrack on it and try to shift course and try to contend again and build on the fly. So that would be the key. If you had an extraordinarily patient owner and you had a great staff, great coaching, great player development model, it would be fun probably to undertake it. Not more fun than what we're doing now, but the trust with the ownership would be the most important factor for me, for sure.
And so how are you building trust with your ownership group now? Because we talked a little bit about this, about managing the ownership group. That's a critically important thing for the GM to do. Everyone thinks about managing down and managing the staff, but honestly, a lot of times the most important relationship is to manage with the owner.
Yeah,
So,
I'm personally not doing much at all in my current role, but I know what Mark's doing and Ross is doing, and the Blue Jays are a bit unique because it's a corporate ownership structure. There are a group of people from Rogers who effectively serve as the ownership group and the people that Mark reports to, and he's spent a lot of time nurturing those relationships, and he felt like and he did that purposefully because he knew that I think partly that's just who he is. He believes in the value of that relationship, and he believes in relationships, period. But he also sees that as a critical piece of what we're going to need in the future, is that at some point we're going to need to, partner with Rogers on some major decision or go through some adversity together. And so he's spent a lot of time on that, and I think has developed a really good relationship, it seems to me. And but that model is different in Boston. I didn't need to work very hard to find ownership. They were very visible, very present, and very interested. And John Henry truly knew more about baseball than people in our office. He is a true fan of baseball, so he was really interested himself to understand everything we were doing. So it was just a different structure, a different dynamic.
And you have an interesting dynamic with your ownership group, but how important is that you're just constantly communicating upward?
Yeah, so I report into the president of our team, Brendan Shanahan, and then he and I together have to go to quarterly meetings with our board of directors. And so we have Rogers, which also owns the Blue Jays, Bell, which is the competing telecommunications conglomerate, and then we have Larry Tannenbaum, who serves as the chairman of our board. And Larry is sort of the face and the more present member of our ownership group. He's around. He's a wonderful guy. He's really a fan and loves all of the teams that come under the MLSE umbrella. But Brendan spends a lot of his time working with them, which makes it very easy for me. So I don't have to do a whole lot of that. He handles it, and then I just go in 4 times a year, and we present to the board and kind of educate them on where we're going with our actual hockey operation and what our plan is. And sort of give them a forewarning of various different things that are on the horizon and just keep them educated. I learned in my first stop in my career that giving the ownership or whoever you're reporting into, if it's a board setup, as much information as possible can go a long way to buying you time, especially when the team isn't performing well early on. Sure. So it's sort of something that I've tried to always follow, even as the team has continued to do well. When I'm reporting into Brendan, is to give him as much information as possible on a daily basis so that he feels that he knows what's going on and that he can report into ownership. And then when I'm presenting to ownership, the same thing. I'd rather them have too much information than wonder what's happening and wonder if we've got a good grasp on where we're headed.
And so over communicating up, and then when you start talking about building your staff, one of the things you said the other day, Kyle, that I thought was really interesting was you have a burning desire to build a really great talent tree, like some of these coaching trees that you see in other sports. So how important is that, and how do you go about doing it?
Yeah, I think as I try to learn and study as just a young executive, to try to learn as much as I possibly can from other sports and existing people in hockey and how they've always had the best people around them. And I think the common denominator has always been that people want to work for organizations where they know that you're going to do everything you can, not only to just develop the players, but develop every staff member, so that when other teams are, and that's not just coaches and managers, it's strength coaches, trainers, therapists, PR people, all throughout, so that when other teams have openings, they're looking to your organization as we know that they've developed this person, and that if people are taking people from your organization, it generally means that you're probably had some success as well. So I think it all blends together. But I think that if we can develop that sort of an environment with our staff, that when we have, of course you're going to have the cost of people leaving and going to different organizations. If it's an assistant GM and they become a GM elsewhere, that creates a hole. But I think if you have that reputation and you build that sort of a culture, that other people, like the best, brightest young people, if they're deciding whether to work for you or Boston or Florida or LA, they're going to look at your organization and say, well, I know they have a long track record of developing their people, and they've got a great tree of people that have moved on to either moved up in the organization or they've been able to develop them and to become general managers elsewhere, head coaches elsewhere, head athletic therapists elsewhere, whatever it may be. And Mark Shapiro has one of the best in baseball, and you see continually the best young people, or even someone in Ben's case, it makes it easy to decide, okay, I'm going to go work for Mark now because I know he has that reputation.
And was that part of the decision matrix in going to work for Mark?
Yeah, Mark and Ross, but and a lot of other people too. You know, it was really mostly about being part of an organization that really saw an opportunity in player development, and not just an opportunity because every team says that, but was already investing in coaching and high performance and sort of the whole arc of player development. But that is a function of Mark and Ross, right? That's part of their vision. So in the end, it was largely because of them.
And now, how are you going about actually building the staff around yourself? And are you thinking about like trying to actually launch, people who take some of the principles that you've learned over the last, 20 some odd years in baseball, and creating, people who are, taking your philosophies and moving on?
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like I'm part of a team of people, doing that with the Blue Jays, and that's, that is one of the great parts of my job right now with the Blue Jays. It is truly a true team of people, and I think it's a team of exceptional people with healthy confidence, but really without ego. I mean, I think we really are just trying to push each other to get better, and one of those areas is clearly in hiring and how we hire and how we develop people, and so it's partly why we're here, right? We're trying to learn from everyone on how to do that better. But we've been pushing. I think we just recognize that that as baseball has evolved, teams have been putting a lot of attention in developing good scouting systems for a long time. Teams have been investing in R&D for a long time, and continue to, and that's really important. But as teams have done that for a long time, the opportunity to build huge advantages in amateur scouting, or huge advantages in international scouting, or huge advantages in the way we use data, those opportunities are less and less, right? You still have to get better at those areas, but it's harder to create huge advantages with those. So where we see the opportunity is in people, and mostly that's focused on player, but it's all people, and how we bring people in and how we help people get better.
That's great. Okay, so how do you two get better as in your profession? How do you spend your time in trying to get smarter as a general manager?
Attending events like this would be one challenging. I think, and a lot of it comes to hiring people that are progressive. They want to push and continue to get better. They're not just going to fit into the landscape. They're going to push you. They want to learn things. They want to push the organization in a better direction every day. And so I think any learning opportunity like this is great. Continually reading, challenge yourself to continue to learn more things, develop relationships, whether it's with Ben or others that have been through what I'm going through now. In my case, is of huge value to me, and just every day, if you have a commitment to wanting to improve, I know every single day I can get better, and I expect our staff to get better every single day and our players to get better every single day, but I have to expect that of myself as well, and that's the most important part to me. But events like this, there's many types of things you can go to where you can just sit and listen and learn from people that have far more knowledge and far more experience, or those are the types of things that I personally like to do.
Ben, how often do you look outside of sport or outside of baseball? Or
quite a bit. I mean, I had an opportunity to, when I was asked to leave the Red Sox in August of 2015, I chose not to jump into a job right away, mostly because I felt like I needed some time to learn from what had happened, what my contribution to it was. So during that time, for a few months, I spent a lot of time outside of baseball. I was fortunate enough at that time to have relationships so that I could go spend some time with an NBA team and go spend some time with an NFL team, an NHL team. I taught a class, so there was an opportunity to do that. And a lot of that, so I learned a lot, and I learned a lot about what had happened in Boston, I think, during that time, but it sort of forced me to challenge my assumptions about, was I really living what I was talking about, especially when I was talking to students, thinking about that really, really clearly. Am I really living what I am asking these students to think about?
Yeah.
So that was a good opportunity for me.
So what would you tell the 60-day version of yourself way back when?
Yeah, I think it gets back to what Kyle said. I think really finding a way to build a really disciplined system of feedback. Is specifically I needed, thinking about that time in Boston as GM, I needed a much different system of feedback from the people around me than Theo did, and I was late in asking for that. So I would have done that much more quickly, and I would have been much more disciplined. And some of that may come in the form of actually, identifying a mission, going through that exercise, identifying, a set of values. And some of it may just have been, less formal, and just identifying someone to hold me accountable to living that.
Yeah.
Because it's not, because my nature would be to collaborate, be part of a collaborative model. So as part of that, I needed feedback. I needed different feedback than someone who, might be more, might be sort of more of an out front or, sort of omnipotent type leader. And both can work. I'm convinced both can work, but both can't work for me.
Yeah.
So
Kyle, you're still 60 days in, so I'm not going to ask you what you would tell yourself 60 days ago. What are you hoping to have accomplished? So in 10 years' time, what are you going to be most proud of?
I think if we build a program where when people come into it, and that's every person that comes into it, so a player, coach, manager, someone in player development, someone on the medical side, public relations, that we've developed a program that can maximize the potential of every person that enters, and that we become more diverse in our hiring, look for more non-traditional places that we can hire people from, and they can add to the knowledge base of our group, and the efficiency of our group. That would be, for me, if you look back in 10 years and we can build that type of structure and program, then if we're hiring talented people and we're drafting talented players, if we get the most out of every one of them every day, I think the results will come in time. And that would be in 10 years to look back on, for me, the thing I would be most proud of.
Excellent. Okay. I'm going to open it up for questions now. So if anyone has one, I'll toss this to you. Here you go.
Kyle, you talked about, this is a microphone.
Yeah, it's an actual microphone.
It's
Yeah.
impressive.
Speaking of, yeah.
My voice is amplified.
Not just for fun.
Yeah, I thought it was just
Not just for looks.
I caught it, which was a big deal. Okay, Kyle, you talked about getting feedback. You want people on your team who are going to ask for feedback or give you feedback about your weaknesses.
Right.
What if it's something that you fundamentally disagree with? So, for example, they say, you need to do a better job of communicating your vision with every layer of the organization, and you believe that it's the job of your leaders at different layers of organization to communicate the vision, something like that.
So in that specific example, I think that if someone were to say to me I wasn't communicating my vision clearly, and even if that was a break in along the chain of our organization, I still think it falls on me, because I have to be accountable for it. So if we have a director of player development or a director of scouting, and the scouts are saying, like, I have no idea what's going on. Right. That's on me, because I haven't communicated properly to our directors at their levels. A couple of years ago, we had a situation where, I had always thought in my mind, 2016, I think it was, that I always thought I was an excellent communicator and everything was very clear. And then after that season, I had a few people say to me, the communication wasn't really great. We had at the beginning and end of every year, we have kind of like a summit where everyone has to come and say, this is what you did. This is what you did well. This is what we did well as a program. This is what we did poorly. And then as it went around, basically every single person said, we didn't feel the communication was great. And I always thought that was one of my best strengths. So it forced me to look back and say, everyone isn't wrong. I have to be a lot better. So, though fundamentally I thought my communication skills were good, it very clearly was not good enough for the people that I had entrusted with the organization. So I think in the end, I have to hold myself accountable if I'm expecting these other people to be great in their jobs as well.
Anything to add on negative feedback?
No, I think also, when you're in a position like Kyle's, I think that's really important to have that environment where you're getting that. But there may be cases where you decide. I think it's okay to decide sometimes that, okay, let's find a solution for that, because that's challenging you. It's getting in the way of your opportunity, your job. But I'm not sure I can make that adjustment right now, because I've got to focus on this. Let's find a different solution to that. But I'm still hearing you. Let's find a solution. It may not come from me.
Okay. Yeah.
Another question? Just toss it over there.
Thanks. It's just really cool. As a Canadian living in Boston, I don't know if I could have chosen a better panel to kick off the session. So thank you, whoever organized it. I have a question about pressure. And both of you, either now or have been, the face of your franchise in a media crazy market about the sports you guys are talking about. And I'd like to get some insight as how you deal with the pressure that you see in the media and in the papers and the radio. And more importantly, I'd like to know that answer, but more importantly, how do you shield your organization? Let's say you don't read the papers or you ignore them. How do you shield your organization who do read the papers, who do listen to the radio? How can you keep them on mission while not responding to all of the media inquiries?
Boy, that's a good one.
That's why I let you answer.
Yeah. I think I guess, and I don't know that I have an answer, but the word that comes to mind is, the first word that comes to mind is teammate, and we think about teammate as the players in the locker room or the players in the clubhouse, but you can sort of use the word to extend to anyone who's working together. And good teammates, whether they're players, the guy next to each other in their locker, or people working in an office together, or people working in an office and a player, because that's another relationship. Good teammates find a way to help each other manage that. And I remember a conversation I had with Dustin Pedroia this was in 2015, probably shortly before I was kicked out. He was rehabbing, and Petey, I love Pedroia. There's so many good things about him. But when he's not able to play, he's absolutely crazy. Like he's absolutely insane because he just loves to play. So when he's not able to be out there, when he was on the DL or rehabbing, I would usually take it upon myself to make sure I was spending time with him because I knew that he needed help during those times, or I was trying to help him during those times. So anyway, I would go down there often during the game. He's usually if he's not in the dugout, he's doing something in the training room to help himself get better. So I'd find him, and we were in a tough stretch, and he made a comment. We were watching the game together, and he made a comment, man, it's either really good here or really bad. And there's no in between. There's no middle in Boston. And I think that was a way of saying that, and I felt this during when I was there, not just as GM, but really the entire time I was there, is that the amount of attention that comes from in all different forms, certainly traditional media, but as you're saying, social media, different ways. The amount of attention, the way the ballpark's built, and literally just even the way you get into the ballpark, nobody has any space. Like there's no space to breathe ever. From the time you get to the park, it's this tiny little passageway into the clubhouse. The clubhouse is tiny. The media is right on you. You walk down this tiny little tunnel to the field. The dugout is cramped. The field's cramped. There's thousands of people on the field during BP. There's never any space. When the team's going well, that is incredibly powerful because all of that is just giving you energy, and it's like you're on top of the wave I think people perform even above expectations when that's happening because there's just this incredible energy behind them. When it's not going well, it's the exact opposite, and all of that energy is negative. And I say I don't have an answer because I don't know that we really figured that out, but the best efforts to figure that out, I think, happen just by people being good teammates to each other and helping each other, kind of reminding each other that, hey, you're not awful, you've got these good qualities. Let's, we'll help, we'll get through this together.
I think it's one thing that we deal with in Toronto because everyone says it all the time. We just dealt with it in free agency. We don't want to go there. It's a fishbowl. It's high pressure. I've probably had the greatest experience that I possibly could have as a teacher, and I was able to be the GM of my hometown team in Sault Ste. Marie in the OHL before I went to Toronto, and that's the only institution in the city that everyone really cares about. So and the media was very negative. The fans are they're great, but they're all over you all the time, everywhere you go. So no matter where you live or no matter what level you're at, you live your life. So if you go to the grocery store and 10 people come up to you and tell you that the team sucks, you suck, you need to trade everybody, it has an effect on you. And in Sault Ste. Marie, when we were no good, it was always negative. And then when we became a good program and a good team, it transformed not to, way to go, it's great, and that positive energy Ben's talking about, it became, you guys aren't good enough because you're not big enough, you're not tough enough, you're not strong enough, you won't win in the playoffs. So it never really went away. And over the course of over 3 seasons, myself, my wife at the time, we just became accustomed to it, and I looked at it as my job to shelter our staff and our players, who they're 16 to 20 years old at that time, from it. Like that, I just looked at that's my position and my job. With Toronto, I find that the media are very, very positive. There's a lot of media because it's a big hockey market and there's a big appetite for the game. But I find by and large that they're very, very positive about the team and the fans. I think because of the way it was articulated to the fans about what we were undertaking in 2014 on, they've been very positive and they felt educated along the way, so it's made it very easy. I'm not naive to think that at some point it won't change as the team gets closer to reaching our goal, that the media and the fans are going to begin to want us to get there more, and with that comes some pressure. Again, I look at it as my job to shield that from the coaches and the players. And on the individual side for those people, I think that's where having a great mental skills and mental wellness program comes into play, to be able to have the players compartmentalize who they are as people, what their expectations are on them as athletes and players, and then be able to have different methods whereby they can shield themselves from that different stuff, accept that it's there, know that it's there, and then roll. I also think that it's incumbent on me to know what's being said about the players, because if you ignore that, you take the route of, I'm not reading it, I don't want to hear anything about what's going on, I don't care what the media says. That might be fine for me, but my job is to manage our staff and our people. So if something negative is said about one of our scouts or one of our players or one of our coaches, and they walk into our facility the next day and they're not in a good place, and I just take the tact of, well, I'm not going to pay attention to it. I don't care what anybody says. I'm going to just worry about my job every day, which I have to do. I'm not giving my best to those people, or I can't manage them properly, or say to, if we have a defenseman who has a bad game and the media is all over him and the fans are all over him and they're going after his family on Twitter, social media, whatever happens, I have to know that so that I can best manage that player the next day. So I do think that falls onto my plate as well.
All right, I'm at 0, but I'm going to take a bullet here because these guys are really good. If you guys have one more quick question, I'm going to let you ask it.
Worried I wasn't going to catch this thing. You guys
Make it
both,
quick, Brian.
What's that?
Make it quick.
Okay.
Get nice.
You guys both have organizations with rich traditions. So I would imagine that there's a generation gap that exists. People that are like, this is the Maple Leafs used to be this, and also people that are on the front end of that. What are we today, right? How do you inspire those people on your team to find the right balance, keeping your tradition but going in the model that you want to go?
I think the way that we've approached it from the beginning is that this is who we are and this is what we're going to be as an organization. And I think you have to always honor the past. And I think that's one of the things that the organization has done. It's been Brendan's vision to really get our alumni involved. We didn't have retired numbers before. We've retired the numbers of all the great players in the history of the Maple Leafs. They do a number of things for alumni that have kind of got them invested again in our program, and that we do all throughout our building and outside our building to make that commemorative for our fans, both who've been generational families where the eldest members of the family have seen the team win, and they've been sharing with the 2 or 3 generations down what it's going to be like when the team wins. Ben would know all about that from Boston, but we've been trying to honor our past of our team while also trying to build a new base of fans of our club. When I first got to Toronto, it was amazing to me. I mean, the Blue Jays were very, very good at the time, so they took on a lot of the fan base. Everyone had Blue Jays hats, but the hockey fans were not always wearing Maple Leaf stuff. There was Pittsburgh, Chicago, LA, the teams that had had success, and now you've seen a big transformation in younger people especially becoming Maple Leaf fans, and our alumni and the history of the team are also deeply invested in it, which has made it all kind of come together and try to push it across the finish line here.
Yeah, I think he said it well. I think the teams, organizations can do a good job honoring the past, but I think current players. My feeling is that current players are much more interested in what their own story is going to be, how to create a story with the group they're with now, and so I think appropriately that's where their focus should be. And then you just have to you make sure that when Tim Raines goes in the Hall of Fame, Kevin Pillar is aware enough that he can answer the question, right? So that it's respectful and it doesn't become a distraction. But personally, I'd want Kevin Pillar spending more energy on, what am I going to do with Teoscar Hernandez? How are we going to do something great today and tomorrow?
All right, they're going to turn our microphones off. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, guys.